feels like it belongs to someone else. That shield represents a lot of things to a lot of people. Symbols are nothing without the women and men that give them meaning. We need someone to inspire us again. It's more complicated now.
We're never gonna stop. This world is ours. There's no going back.
It doesn't have to be a war.
It already is.
We can't lose this fight. If we do this, we're gonna do it our own way.
Welcome back to the channel, everyone, where we love talking about movies and more. I'm your host, Mason Phillips, and today we have a TV review for Marvel Studios' The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So before we get any further in this video, I want to ask you guys to hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to get notified when new videos go live on this channel. When you guys do that, it always helps me out, and I greatly appreciate it. Almost at 500 subscribers, less than 200 away. For all of you that love the content on this channel, love what I do here, and you haven't subscribed yet, I'd ask that you please do so. I would really appreciate it. Now, let's talk about the plot. Following the events of Avengers Endgame, Sam Wilson, also known as the Falcon, and Bucky Barnes, the Winter Soldier, team up in a global adventure that tests their abilities and their patience. Alright, so what was good about the Falcon and the Winter Soldier? Well, this show got a chance to do stuff that I don't think the MCU tends to do a whole lot anymore, and one thing I really appreciated about this show was the fact that we could slow down and have some nice character moments. We deal with characters like Bucky, a brainwashed assassin who was from the 1940s World War II era, and he's just gone through all of this time. He says that in the show, in the first episode, he just went on from one fight to the next and never really had a chance to breathe, and now we get to unpack his mental state. He gets to deal with all of this stuff. It's truly healing. He's going through therapy. He got pardoned for all of his past crimes as the Winter Soldier, and we get to visit sides of these characters that we don't really get to do in the films, and that's where the benefit of these shows come in, is we get to slow down for a little bit. While the shows do have some pacing issues and some structural issues, when we get to slow down and have these nice character moments, that's some of the best stuff that we got out of the entire MCU. I talked about this in my Black Widow review yesterday. We got to have some nice character moments in more recent MCU stuff. Say what you will about all the post-Endgame stuff that's come out, but we've been able to have some nice character moments that I don't think we really got a whole lot of in phases 1, 2, and 3. Phases 1, 2, and 3, of course, I think are better overall compared to phases 4 and 5, but there are some things that have been nice to dive into that we didn't really get a chance to do before, mostly in these Disney Plus shows, and this is where the Disney Plus shows really shine. We get to do this stuff with Bucky, we got to do it with Sam, we get to see more of his home life, we learn that he has a sister, he's got 2 nephews, and get to deal with some of the questions that we didn't really get answered to before, like how does an Avenger make money? How is being displaced after the 5-year time gap between Infinity War and Endgame, after the events of the blip, how do all these people who came back into the world and everybody who was already in the world, how does all this meld together? How do people come back into society and rest back in society? That is one of the hard questions that this show tries to tackle, and I think it does pretty well in the first couple episodes, and kind of in the finale. It is a little messy as we go further on through the show, but it's a nice question that the show tries to address, and I'm glad that they at least tried to address it where a lot of other projects in the past haven't. This is one of the things that this show got to do that I really enjoyed. Another thing that I thought was really interesting, maybe didn't pay off super well, but was interesting, was this Isaiah Bradley character and the dark history of the US government, the super soldier program, kind of tackling some real world racial issues as well. This is something that the MCU has kind of shied away from in the past. You've had other projects like Luke Cage, one of the Defenders series, kind of deal with this, but nothing quite on the level that the Falcon and the Winter Soldier did. And I also don't think that went as far with the subject matter as it could have, but I'm glad that it at least tackled a hard subject that probably needed to be talked about. And I think for the most part, it doesn't do it overly preachy. There are times where it does get a little too preachy, but I don't think it ever does it to the point that it loses the audience. Then it's a subject that was important to talk about, that I'm glad was brought up, and it brings some new insight into how Sam kind of viewed the whole position of becoming Captain America. And it's something that I didn't think we would really get. You know, he was given the shield at the end of Endgame by Steve, so your assumption would be that he then becomes the next Captain America. But there's not really this issue as to whether or not he can take up the mantle, and I didn't know that was going to be a question that was going to be answered, or a question that needed to be answered. And it's a very interesting path they took this character on, but it's one that I found to be pretty captivating, pretty interesting, and I was kind of along for the ride for the most part on this. So an interesting subject that they tackled here, and I think for the most part, Sam's journey to becoming Captain America, I think it does pay off, especially when we get the John Walker character introduced here, kind of becoming the semi-replacement for Steve Rogers, but not really the replacement for Steve Rogers. This character is almost like if that soldier named Hodge from the first Avenger, if you remember this guy, it's the guy that Peggy Carter punches when they're in the lineup at Camp Lehigh. If that guy became Captain America, and it's what Erskine talked about, good becomes great, bad becomes worse. Well, complicated becomes more complicated, and that is John Walker. He's a more complicated character, and he's not very level-headed. So when you get somebody like that who becomes Captain America, not only becomes Captain America, but also then juices themselves up with the super soldier serum, what does that do to this person? And there's some interesting conversations about when he takes the super soldier serum, what does that do to a person? And there's interesting topics and conversations on how the super soldier serum should be used. Is it used specifically for power? How does it affect a person? What is its role in regards to somebody taking up the mantle of Captain America? Does it automatically mean that they have to become a super soldier just because Steve Rogers was a super soldier and then Isaiah Bradley after him? And does that mean that the mantle of Captain America automatically goes along with becoming a super soldier? And Sam Wilson proves that that is not the case. And I think John Walker also proves that is not the case, because when he becomes the super soldier, we see the problematic side of this guy just going on a rage fit and taking things way too far, where Steve Rogers never went to that line and never crossed that line. And then we see the flip side of Sam Wilson, seeing that he doesn't have to go down this path. We can relate to this guy because he is just a guy, but we also see why Steve was willing to pass on the mantle of Captain America to Sam, because Steve never thought that Sam should become a super soldier. That was never in his thought process. We see why he chose Sam, I think more so in the 5th and 6th episode. It's Sam's character. It's him rising above the fact that he's not superpowered, but is still willing to do the fight, do the work, do good at the end of the day. So we see the character of Sam really shine through all of the show, and it's something that I think Captain America Brave New World really missed with Sam, is that we didn't get the whole reasoning or the feel as to why Sam was Captain America. He just kind of becomes Captain America at the end of all of this, and then we don't really see the characteristics of Captain America shine through Sam as much in Brave New World, but we see that here in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. We see the earnestness of this guy, we see the humility of Sam, and we see the fact that he is willing to take up this mantle in spite of how the world may view him, a black man becoming Captain America, and what that means for the role of Captain America in this very divided and political world. Will people accept him as Captain America? And it's those subjects and those stories that I do like that the show tackled, but did it do it super effectively? We'll get into that in the mixed and negative. I think they could have gone a little stronger with some of these storylines, but I'm glad that the show tried to tackle these subject matters anyway. It's something that I think was worth going into, and I'm glad that the show did. Something that was really cool, that suit that Sam gets, the Captain America suit from the Wakandans in the final episode, that's one of the best from comics to screen suits I've seen. It looks so much like the Captain America Sam Wilson suit from the comics. It's something that I was a little disappointed that didn't continue on with in Brave New World. And I know the whole reasoning was that the cowl was a little hard for Anthony Mackie to wear. It kind of hindered his vision. It was a lot harder to move around in. So So I get why they made the change in Brave New World, took away the cowl but just left the goggles. But I wish that they would have kept that. I also like the suit where the white color really pops more off of the blue on the suit, and it's the suit that I wish he would have carried on through the rest of Brave New World, and then they kind of switched to a more darker blue suit for his Captain America suit in Brave New World. I wasn't a big fan of that. This suit is, I think, the best looking that this character has ever been in the whole series of the MCU, and I'm kind of disappointed that we didn't get this suit going forward through the rest of the series. Hoping maybe it'll come back a little bit in Doomsday or Secret Wars. We'll see. But this show was very good. I forgot how great the first couple episodes were, and even the 5th and 6th episode were pretty good as well. It's one of those shows I think that really got hated on because it was just a little disappointing and a little messy in the middle of the season. And then we kind of feel like we're rushed to the finale. But upon this rewatch, I don't really feel as rushed as I did when I first watched it. I think having the context of the entire show, watching it in one go versus watching it week to week is a little bit better. So doing it in a binge format, I think benefited this show rather than waiting week to week. So when you have to wait week to week, when that episode doesn't necessarily pay off in the following week, you're a little disappointed and left wanting more, and then you're finally just thrust into the finale and you feel that it was a little lackluster. But I think when you do it in a full binge format like I did for this one, for the most part, it really helps to elevate the series. And it still has some problems, but I wasn't as disappointed going through this show. And also in hindsight of how we got Brave New World, comparing Falcon and the Winter Soldier to Captain America Brave New World, this show is better in hindsight because I thought the show actually was better than the Captain America Brave New World movie. And a little surprised that that's how it worked out, but I think it also helps to elevate this show in spite of how that film did. So there's a lot of great stuff here, but this is also a show that was kind of muddled and had some issues. So let's go ahead and talk about what was mixed with the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. For me, what was mixed, we fall into episodes 3 and 4, and I think those episodes really kind of slow the whole story down. There is a lost plot point because when the show came out, it came out around the time of COVID, and there were some story points through the show that were dealing with some kind of virus, and they had to remove some storylines, and so as not to shine a light on what was going on in our reality. And I think that actually kind of hindered the show because it felt very sloppy. As we go through episodes 3 and 4, I feel like there's some sloppy editing that was done to cover up the missing storyline. So it feels like some things are just happening kind of out of nowhere, and it feels like we're just jumping from plot point to plot point. There's a few missing scenes that could have helped to piece the whole story together a little bit more cohesively. And I think that's where we get the rushed feel through this entire series as well, is that there's a few things that were missed that probably needed to stay there. Even though that was the reality of our time, as you continue to watch this show for years and years to come, this is a project that should have been able to last beyond when it was first released. So I think that was a point in which the studio got a little too reactionary and should have just let the show be as it was. I don't think a lot of us were really going to be critiquing the show for continuing on with that plot point, because this was a show that was already in production way before 2020, before the COVID pandemic even happened. It's one of those issues where the studio got just a little too reactionary and they should have just let the show be as it was initially intended to be. I think the show would have been much greater for it, and the show would have felt a lot more cohesive and not so choppy in the middle episodes. Now, another thing that was mixed was the messaging. Throughout this entire show, we have this strange messaging from the Flag Smashers about how they're trying to unite the whole world because of what happened with the State of the Blip, people coming back, people being displaced. There's a story about refugees and people being moved by the government and feeling like they're being displaced by the government, having no choices and choices being taken away from you, talking about marginalized people, marginalized society. That's some stuff that was probably very important to talk about in the show, but it's not done to the effectiveness that it needed to be because of the group that's really pushing this message. This group is essentially a terrorist group. They are killing people for their own gain, for their message, to further their cause. And when you cross that line into murder, you kind of lose the righteousness of your mission. It's not a righteous mission anymore. You're just killing people because they're getting in your way. So the Carly Morgenthau character, I think, would have worked if they didn't really cross that line into murder with her character. She just becomes very sanctimonious and very hypocritical as we go through the show. So I get what they were going for with this character, but it was the way this character went and the way this character was portrayed that messaging just really got lost through this entire plot. All right, what was bad about the Falcon and the Winter Soldier? Well, I think Zemo is very out of place. I know they wanted to revisit his character. It doesn't make a lot of sense in how he was utilized through this. Now, there is some cohesiveness between his character in Civil War. They got Daniel Bruhl back, but he almost feels like an entirely different character. It's the same thing when they also revisit the character of Sharon Carter. She also feels like an entirely different character from how she was in Captain America Civil War. Now, I know a lot of time has passed since the events of that film to the show, but the character of Sharon Carter, she had the values of Peggy Carter thrust upon her. She almost feels like an entirely different character, and then they did that reveal of her being the power broker. That really kind of fell flat. By the end of the show, there was no mystery as to who the power broker was because there wasn't any other characters that were popping up out of nowhere in the show. It was just Sharon, and we were all pretty sure that she was going to be the power broker. So the reveal of her being the one kind of pulling the strings behind the Flag Smashers and the one that was giving them all the power, the super soldier serum, just didn't really land very well. And it's again these characters that feel very different. They're making decisions that don't really line up from the last time we met them. I understand that time has passed, but as an audience member, when the last time we saw them, the character was one way, and now you flip them and they're completely different, and there's not really a lot of explanation as to why. They try to write it off that Sharon was wronged. She felt like she got the raw deal, but she chose to help Sam. She chose to help Steve in Civil War. So when she's so reactionary and so angry about the way that those events went for her, it doesn't really make sense and it doesn't line up when we come back to this character in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. For Zemo, it doesn't really make sense. The very rich baron that he is in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I know this way he is in the comics, but it's not at all how he was portrayed in Civil War. He was portrayed as the soldier for Sokovia, so I don't really see where the two parts of that character line up. They don't feel congruent with each other. It's the same actor, but it feels like two completely different takes on the character. So there's not cohesiveness in the writing where those characters were concerned, and then the whole reveal of Sharon Carter being the power broker just didn't make sense. It felt like they just wanted to revisit these characters so that the audience didn't forget about them, but I think it would have been better if they just hadn't been utilized through the show in the first place. This is a very complicated series to talk about. I think it was a show that could have been very great, and I think it was on the cusp of greatness. But because of the sloppy editing, the last-minute changes that they made to the show in reaction to what was going on in the real world, the writing for the characters of Sharon Carter and Zemo, some of the messaging they're trying to talk about with racial tensions, the political state of the world, just didn't quite land. And then the whole mission of the villains trying to be really more altruistic, and they're really trying to do good for the world, was all lost because of the lines they cross and killing people, committing murder. I don't think it all came together as strongly as it could have. However, this show did do great things in character drama. We were allowed to slow down and focus on the personal lives of our heroes. I think we really get an insight into why Steve chose Sam to be Captain America. I love the suit that Sam gets. At the end of the series, I accepted him as the new Captain America. And so where the show needed to do that for me to accept Sam as the next Captain America, the show was successful in doing that. But there's just a few things that kind of fall flat. So this is a very muddled, mixed series. I kind of go back and forth on how I feel about this whole show, but I think at the end of the day, there is a lot of good in the show in the midst of all of the mess. If I'm going to give the show a rating, it's got to be a 3.5 out of 5 or a B- on the letter scale. I really wanted to like the show so much more, and I think the show was just on the cusp of greatness, but there's just so much that makes this show muddled, but it's not as bad as I think the conversation around this show is. It's actually still very entertaining, and I think it's worth the rewatch, especially now with all these characters from the Falcon and the Winter Soldier coming back into the MCU. I think it's worth your time to go back and revisit the show. I ended up liking it a whole lot more than I remembered I did. If you've seen the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, go down in the comment section and let me know what you thought of the show. I would love to hear from you. Before you leave, remember to hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you get notified when new videos go live on this channel. When you guys do that, it always helps me out and I greatly appreciate it. Hope you all have an awesome and a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next video.